Hello, and welcome to the first video in our series Kotlin for Beginners. Throughout this series, we'll explore how to write idiomatic Kotlin code through real-life examples. To begin with, we'll look at how to use Kotlin combined with Spring Boot to create a simple API. This video will require you to have a basic understanding of programming. However, it is also a good starting point if you're looking at understanding core concepts surrounding APIs. Before you start, you might want to make sure to have both Java and Gradle installed in your computer. If you haven't, you can look at the links in the description below with explanations on how to get that done. You'll also need an IDE, or an integrated development environment. Since we're coding in Kotlin, I suggest you use IntelliJ. You can find a download link in the description below. With that said, let's begin. So the first thing you want to do is go to start.spring.io. In here, you'll see that you can select several things. So for our project, let's just choose Gradle project. Under language, you want to choose Kotlin. We're going to skip the Spring Boot section and go straight to project metadata. Now, under group, you can write pretty much whatever you want, but I'm going to write com.API for beginners. And then under artifact, I'm going to write my first API. You'll see that name gets automatically filled at the same time. And for the description, you can choose anything you want, but I'm going to write my first API. Now we'll leave the other options as they are and then open the Add Dependencies panel. And in here, you can choose Spring Web. Once you've done that, you can click on the Generate button and it will start downloading your project setup. So what you want to do with that is you want to unzip it and then open it with IntelliJ. I'm going to show you how to do that. In IntelliJ, once you open it, you won't have any projects yet. So you just want to click Open, find wherever you unzipped your file, click on your My First API folder, and just click OK to open it. Once we're in here, we can have a look at what we actually have. So if you go to the SRC folder, you'll see that there's main and test underneath. Let's open main by double-clicking it. Then in there, you'll see Kotlin. Let's open that. And then you'll see your package, which is com.api4beginners.myfirstapi. And underneath it, we have our application, which is myfirstapi application.kt. Let's just double-click on that. Well, this particular file is your actual application, and this is where everything starts. The Spring Boot application annotation, the yellow one, is the one that tells Spring Boot which class is your actual application. And right underneath that, you can see that it says class My First API Application, which is the name of your application. But let's just leave that for a moment and focus on fun main, which is your main function. And this is where everything begins. To visualize that, let's just make a print statement here. You do that by writing println parenthesis, and then in quotations, write hello. In order to run this, you have to open your terminal, which is down here. And once in your terminal, you write Gradle boot run and press enter. This might take a little while because you're actually compiling your application, but once it's done, you'll see that some logs start showing up. And there we go, we have some logs. As you can see, your application is already running, but we can't really find this hello, and that is because this happens as the very first thing once you start your application. So in order to see that, we have to go further up. Over here, you can see that we already have the Spring logo, and right over it, we have the hello, which is exactly what we expected, since this is the first thing to happen once we start our application. We won't be needing this code anymore, so you can go ahead and delete it. You might notice that our application is still running, and what this means is that it's still receiving requests. In order to see that, let's go to our browser and have a look. In our browser, we can go to localhost 8080 and press enter. You'll see that we'll get an error page. But don't worry, this is nothing to get alarmed about. What this error message is telling us is that there's nothing to receive our request in our endpoint and that can handle it in a way that is meaningful to us. You can see that by looking at the type of the error in the bottom that says not found and the status 404. Now let's go back to our application and stop it. To do that, simply press Ctrl C in the command line and you'll get prompted whether or not you want to stop your application. Simply press Y and enter and your application will be terminated. So we know that our application is not really taking any requests because we haven't defined any functions that can process such requests. Let's try and change that by adding a controller. In order to receive a request from our browser or client and send something meaningful in return. To do that, go to your package, right-click, select New Package, write the package name, which I'm going to call Hello. Then within your package, right-click, select New Kotlin class, and write Hello Controller, and press Enter. IntelliJ will then generate an empty class with the same name as your class file, which is a convention in Kotlin. If we were to run our code now, the same error we noticed earlier would happen again, and the reason for that is that Spring still doesn't know that our class exists, and our class doesn't have any code that handles any requests yet. So let's continue by adding a REST controller annotation. To do that, simply type @REST, and then you'll see that you get some options. The option I want is REST controller, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Tab, and that will autocomplete the annotation as well as import everything that I need in order to use that annotation within my class. Now that we've told Spring that this is going to be a controller, we also need an endpoint. An endpoint is basically just an entry point into your application and is directly connected to a function that processes a request in a specific manner in order to return a meaningful response. To make that, we simply need a function. In Kotlin, you write a function by typing fun, giving it a name, which I'm going to call hello, adding parentheses, and this part here is very Kotlin specific. I'm simply going to write equal sign, and then within quotation marks, I'm going to write hello. Well, this is called an expression function. An expression function is basically an implicitly typed function. After writing our function, we still need to tell Spring that this is an endpoint. And the way to do that is much in the same way as we did with REST controller. This time, we'll add an annotation that is called @getMapping. So I'll write @get, and then I'll select getMapping by tabbing. That'll also import the necessary annotation into my class. Alright, now let's test that. To test that, simply go to your terminal and press the up arrow key twice, or write Gradle boot run and press enter. You'll see that your application starts running again. And once this is done, let's go back to our browser and test it out. Back in our web page, we simply refresh, and there we go, hello. Now, one important thing to notice here is that the new endpoint we just created corresponds only to one specific route. To change that, we would have to add additional endpoints specifying different routes. A route is the part of the URL that comes after your base URL. In our case, we write localhost 8080. A route would be everything that goes after 8080. Let's try and make some additional routes then. Let's start by changing the route in our current endpoint to /hello. To do that, simply type that within quotation marks inside a parenthesis right after your getMapping annotation. We can continue by adding an additional endpoint, and we do that simply by adding the getMapping annotation. Then within it, we'll say hello world, and underneath it, we'll add a function, which we do by typing fun. Then we'll call it hello world, and again parenthesis, equal sign, and hello world within quotation marks. What we can see here is that both of our endpoints correspond to two different routes, hello and hello world. We want to have a default route as well, so we're going to add that by adding an additional function, which we'll put on top, and we'll simply do the same, get mapping, fun, default, parentheses, equal sign, and then we'll write this is our default endpoint. Finally, let's just test that out by restarting our application, which you do by pressing Ctrl+C, Y, Enter, writing Gradle, boot run, Enter, and waiting for the application to start. Once that is done, let's go back to our browser one last time and check out what the results are. Back in our browser, we can simply refresh the page and then we'll get our "This is our default endpoint" message. If we then go to /hello, we'll get our hello message. And lastly, if we go to /hello world, we'll see our hello world message. That's all for our first lesson on using Kotlin and Spring Boot to create an API. If you liked it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so that you can follow our future videos.